I used to be a real technology geek for a long time, and about roughly 10 years ago, I found out that humans actually are much more interesting than technology. So I'm knee-deep into psychology and everything that works there. And actually, that was sort of a feedback loop because for example, I'm a Disneyland nut. I love going there. I think the way they play with our senses, how they tell stories and everything is great. And I also like stage magic. So everything that's about illusions and deceptions, I liked. And then seeing how actually people like magicians have an intuitive feel for human psychology and how it works has fascinated me a lot. So, but still, I'm going to talk about future. And I'm going to start off with a very good observation by Karl Valentin, who said even the future was better in earlier times. And he's right. No, I'll start this totally again. I work at Microsoft, and what we do is we do executive summaries, which means that Steve Ballmer doesn't have an awful lot of time, better get everything down into a simple thing, into a simple phrase that you can explain your idea or concept to him. Sometimes you also hear this as the elevator pitch. And so basically, I was able to condense my whole presentation into one single word that tells you everything about the future and how humans perceive it. And it's this. So, what do I mean with this? Jackpot? Well, in Germany we have Lotto and you have lotteries everywhere else. And lotteries, of course, they're games of luck and sometimes somebody wins. But lotteries show this weird psychological effect that what you can do is you can advertise that nobody has won in the past weeks and people rush out to buy tickets. Which is, from a rational point of view, totally absurd. Why would you do that? They've just proven to you that for the past 6, 8, 12 weeks, nobody has won, and ticket sales go up. Your chances of winning haven't increased. Well, theoretically, the pot of honey has gotten a lot bigger, but it's still 1 in 14 million to get it, and 1 in 140 million to get the jackpot prize. So why do you do that? It's because we cannot reliably predict the future, and we're very wrong about this. And when we're talking about predicting the future and looking at this from a technology angle, the favorite example is the flying car. Where is the flying car you promised me in the 50s? Well, even earlier, even Henry Ford, who's responsible for modern industrial work, basically on how he changed car production with the Ford Model T, even he believed that sometimes we would fly around in our cars. And that didn't happen. And actually, the history of aviation is very good to show you a couple of examples on how people were just totally wrong about the future. So, going back to 1895, Lord Kelvin, who was such a noted scientist that they actually named the temperature after him, and Thomas Alva Edison, they both said flying machines will never take off. Of course, a couple of years later, the brothers Wright did just that. In 1911, a French gentleman called Ferdinand Foch, he said that airplanes are toys without any military value. Now, he became the commander-in-chief for the Allied forces in the First World War, and one of the first things he did was ordering 7,000 Sopwith Camel airplanes. In 1936, everybody was pretty convinced that dirigibles, blimps, zeppelins would be the form of transportation that would basically make transatlantic crossings bearable. And these were the future of commercial air travel. And just 1 year later, in 1937, the Hindenburg exploded, and sort of this whole branch died out immediately. The funny thing about this is, why did the Hindenburg explode? Yeah, well, it was filled with hydrogen. Why was it filled with hydrogen? Because the US had a helium embargo against Nazi Germany. So they actually caused the whole thing and crashed their upcoming industry with that. And in 1960, the RAND Corporation, which is a big think tank in the US, they said that most likely in a couple of years it will take less than 7 hours to fly once around the world in a standard commercial tourist airliner. Now, how did they get to this 7-hour figure? Basically, between 1930 and 1960, the average airspeed of commercial airplanes grew by 7. So they were flying basically 7 times faster in the 60s than in the 30s on a sustained air travel. So they just extrapolated that and said, look, this is what's going to happen. Then somebody built a Concorde, which was basically doing Mach 2, which is about 2.5 times faster than a jumbo 747 or so, but it's just so, excuse me, fucking expensive that it is a dead end. So it never ever happened. So one of the things you see here, the pattern you see here, is that a report about the future usually is just extrapolating on what we do today, so basically creating tomorrow's present. And that, of course, will break sooner or later. But we do have experts, don't we, that are supposed to know what's going to happen next? So, some other experts. My favorite one is John of Toledo in 1179, a famous astronomer. He said because the planets would align on a certain axis, the world was definitely going to end in September 1186. You're going to tell me now, Boris, there's a lot of people that have told us that the world is going to end, but John of Toledo actually had quite a bit of followers, like the Archbishop of Canterbury, who ordered a 3-day fast around the days calculated, and in the palaces of Byzantium, Constantinople, today Istanbul, they basically stonewalled all the windows to protect itself against the coming of the end of the world. In 1966, NASA reliably predicted that by now we would have a base on Mars with permanent residents. In 1971, the appropriate climate model for the world, for the planet Earth, was that we're most likely going into a new ice age. Because we're putting all those pollutants in the air, sunlight would be reflected off the atmosphere, so the average temperature would go down a lot, and we would be all freezing right now. And my absolutely favorite one from modern times, of course, in 2007, the White House Council of Advisors basically said to the president and everybody else, economy is just doing fine, we'll have a 3% growth over the next 3 years every year. Don't need to tell you about that. So you're going to tell me, well, these are all edge cases, right? Usually experts are doing right because newspapers and TV stations and everybody else, they tell us about the future, a lot of things, so they must be right. So can we statistically find out whether experts actually have a clue how the world works and how it's going to end up? Somebody did that. There's actually a psychologist in the US called Philip Tetlock. And in 1985, over some arguments about whether the glasnost, the breaking down of the Soviet system in the Soviet Union, was caused by this or that factor, he decided to ask global experts on economy and politics and everything else about predictions about the future. And he noted everything down. He invented a scale where they would check events like what happens with oil prices, will China start a war, things like that, on a scale from 0, not at all, to 9, absolutely will happen. And he scaled that, and he had 284 experts doing these predictions, and he collected them all over 20 years and did proper, real, totally valid statistical analysis on this. And we're talking about the same people that make policies, that become secretaries of state and so forth, so the people who are supposed to know. And basically all those experts, they're only marginally better than throwing dice when it comes to predicting the future, even on those global scales. Now, you've heard that before, like the monkey that can better pick stocks than the investment bankers and so forth. So that in itself is not that surprising that maybe they are not better. Where it becomes really, really troublesome is that the more convinced a person is of something, overall his judgment will be more clouded, and he will be more wrong on other things. So the more you have a firm belief in that gold prices will skyrocket over there, you will most likely also will have a very wrong idea what happens with a war in China. And what's even more disturbing is that when he did that cross-analysis, is that people that have large media exposure usually are more wrong than anybody else. Actually, the wrongest of them all. Wrong superlative here. And why? his explanation is, well, those folks have a very clear and simple solution to a problem, something you can put down in a soundbite, in a 4,000-word column in the New York Times, in a 60-second statement on CNN. If there's somebody like, well, I don't really know, it could happen this way or that way, we would have to look at this, and they will never get into media. But somebody who goes there and says, I know that this is going to happen, he, of course, will get all the exposure in the world. So basically, you could say that the probability of somebody telling you something is going to happen this way or that way on TV, that this person is wrong, is very, very high. And actually, we should be very afraid of that. There are no simple explanations. And that's where this talk becomes a little bit meta, because for all of this, I'm going to give you some very simple explanations, so, which they aren't. So everything I'm going to say is condensed down magically to a small amount of things. And you should, I've forgotten to start the clock. Ah, that's the clock. You shouldn't take everything as the final truth. So, predictions. Why do we make predictions? Predictions are about convincing people today, not about being right tomorrow. So somebody tells you, this is going to happen, and then we act on it. That's why we make predictions. But it's not like we're going to ask the people over and over again, well, what you did it happen, what you told me? You know what I mean. This actually comes from an author, Dan Gardner, a great book, Future Babel, and I'm giving you a lot of things to read by the end of the talk, where he goes deeply, especially into all those kind of decision-making processes. So why are we so wrong? And we're getting to something, and I found it so amusing that the same thing had been in 2 talks today already, and it's fun, and it's why I'm wearing this shirt, Iceland, been there. That's behind a waterfall in Iceland. Iceland has beautiful waterfalls. You need to go there. I love this place. So who does see the face? Now that I said there is a face, who does see the face? Of course, there is not a face behind this waterfall. It's just an optical illusion. We say that. But we are great at pattern recognition. So I knew that. But going to Iceland, I had this very strange effect, because these are not just random faces. In Iceland, people believe that there are trolls, and they're living in the stones, or they're cast in stone. And once you hear that, and once you see the first 2 or 3 first ones you see, you start seeing them everywhere, because once you have the idea in your head, it's like a viral video, it's going viral, you're seeing them everywhere. So everywhere you look, you start seeing faces. This is one of my favorite ones. And the worst thing about this, and this is where it gets highly troubling, is when I go back to this, you immediately see this face. And if I show you this picture in a year's time, you will immediately see the face. Because our pattern recognition system in our brain is really, really, really good. No computer can do what we can do right now, especially detecting faces, seeing somebody, and in tenths of a second knowing who he is. Of course, we can throw a lot of processing power behind that, but we have no idea how it actually works in our brains. It has been shaped this way by evolution, and evolution favors false positives. So basically, when I go somewhere and it looks like there might be a Flintstone logic saber-toothed tiger somewhere, of course I run away, because a false positive running away definitely, even if it's not a real saber-toothed tiger behind there, it increases my chances of survival, while a false negative would be different. So we're tuned into false positives, and we're tuned into, once we see patterns and things, immediately making short-term decisions. And this now compresses 40 years of brain research into about 60 seconds. What happens is that we have a sort of subconscious running system that makes decisions, while we have a conscious system that validates those decisions for us. There are a lot of, you could call them funny experiments you can do with people that have a certain kind of brain damage where the left half and the right half of the brain can't talk to each other. Now, because things get over all the time, I'm making this up a little bit easier. So basically what you'd say is, if your speech system, so what you say is located in the right half of the brain, you would show the right eye, but you'd show the left brain a message like, stand up and go out of the room. But only the left side. So the person leaves the room, and you ask them, why are you leaving the room? And they'll immediately tell you, I got thirsty. Because the right-hand side has no idea why I just got up. But it needs to have an idea, because we would go insane if we ourselves would know why we are doing the things all the time. So we constantly invent stories about the things we do. And those stories validate our decisions. It's most often the other way around. It's when I think I did this because, no, you're wrong, you did this because of a weird process in the brain, and you have a story ready on why you're doing this. And the same thing happens, of course, with future predictions. So the next thing, when we see that we have great pattern recognizers, we see that the next thing I'm going to show you should absolutely not happen if we take that for granted, which is called the Genie Dixon effect. Genie Dixon was a fortune teller, a psychic. And she predicted the assassination of John F. Kennedy, which happened in 1963, in 1956. So because of this one prediction and several others that were right, she became very famous, and she ended up as a, not real official, but as an advisor to Richard Nixon. But of course, she was very, very wrong on many occasions, and we're supposed to see that she doesn't have any real psychic powers. She just was wrong. She was just right about a couple of things. And if you make many predictions, some of them just will be wrong. So why don't we see the pattern here? Why do we believe in somebody that was wrong, right a couple of times, that he might be able to predict the future? Again, because our brain is wired in a very strange way. Daniel Kahneman, in his great book, Thinking Fast and Slow, describes the brain as a machine for jumping to conclusions, meaning we see something and we immediately make our mind up on what it's supposed to be with the available information. And we could create a long list. These are five psychological effects out of a list of 200-300 that are paradoxes that we see and we would not believe. And the funny thing about most of them is, even if you know, if you've read all the literature, if you've seen the experiments, and you know that these effects are there, you can't switch them off. You fall into those traps over and over again. First of all, there's a so-called confirmation bias, which is anything that supports my beliefs, I believe, and anything that doesn't support my beliefs, I try to filter out as much as I can. A classic example is Stiftung Warentest Consumer Report. If I'm going to buy a washing machine and I'm buying the magazine that reviews washing machines, I think their review is very good, and I'm taking the information and I see which machine might be the right one for me. Now, if I already made the purchase and I have a washing machine at home and I'm buying the very same magazine and it's the very same review, and the machine I bought is ending up second to last, I immediately know what they did wrong because they didn't account for that, and so forth. It's confirmation bias at work, that the information that comes in, we automatically filter and try to sort into what we're thinking and believing. There's an optimism bias, always see the brightest path. That's the lottery thing. I can immediately, if I could ask any of you, what would you do if you win $2 million, 2 million euros in the lottery? Everybody would have an image in his head. But what would you do if tomorrow you notice that by buying the lottery ticket, you're now 2 euros short that you need to buy something? Although it's a statistically easier scenario, you don't have a clue, because we can immediately think about great things and we can see the brightest path. That is how in Berlin airports are built, and everybody believes for a long time that everything is fine and will be under cost and so forth, and there comes the realization one day that everybody was just filtering out all the information to stay inside the plan when the reality was totally different. Survivorship bias, that's the one that gets tricky in this audience, because you hear a lot of things from a lot of creative people, and of course they're the ones that are successful. But you never remember the third guy on the moon. First person on the moon? Neil Armstrong. Second person? Most people still know. Buzz Aldrin. Who was the third guy? Charles Conrad. Nobody remembers. Well, this is a person that had a chance of 1 in roughly 400 million to get to the moon. 8 billion people on the planet, just about 20 made it. Less than 20, 10 or so made it. But still, we don't remember, because it's only the big things that count. Availability bias, we only use the kind of information we have access to, and we don't think what sometimes in German is called thinking outside the box. But we don't think that there might be something else. And finally, something which is called illusion of control, which I could talk in length about, but I'll get back to it in a minute anyway, so I'll leave it here. So, our brain likes believable, well-told stories. If somebody goes in there and gives you a pretty good explanation why the oil price will go up 20% in the next 3 months, with a great idea on why Arab countries are going to do this and this, you're going to believe this story. And you're not going to believe the cold, hard statistical fact that nobody in the oil industry has any chance of predicting the oil price over the next 90 days. They can't. If you look at the curve, it goes up and down. But you hear a story, the story sounds well, your brain goes into, great, I like that, I love that. So, back to the future. Why can't we predict the future? My favorite example for not being able to predict the future is that it's called a double pendulum. So it basically is a very simple system. It's just 2 pieces of mass connected with a string, and they start swinging around. And after a while, weird things happen. Very weird things happen. And that is the point where, when I give this talk, especially to technical people, they tell me, now, Boris, you're wrong, because what you're running here, of course, is a computer simulation. So we can predict the future, because otherwise we couldn't run this as a simulation. The funny thing is that's an idealistic representation, and it's doing that simply because the precision of the computer isn't high enough, so we get small, tiny errors. And if you would build this in real life, and you will build the perfect robot, and you'd have that even in a vacuum and everything, and it would go from the exact position each and every time, the curve would be different each and every time, because each minuscule amount of error in something, like one molecule hitting it a different way, will change the feedback loop in a way, it's sometimes called chaos theory, that you'll get unpredictable results. This is like an idealistic result that will run on this computer, but if you do the experiment, it will look different each and every time. So if you go to something mundane as the weather report, that's a typical weather report chart from Germany on German TV, and they have this nice white line, which they talk about. What they don't talk about, they actually start to show now, is this gray bar. What's this gray bar? The company in Germany that does the Meteo Media, that does the weather report for the ARD, our version of, well, not PBS, but first program, whatever. They basically have a climate simulation model, which they think is very sophisticated. They have, I think, over 500 weather stations in Germany, so they have a very thick net that they'll feed into a large computer array and do their calculations. So what they do is they change their parameters 50 times. They make tiny changes to the parameters. And the gray area is what those 15 different runs of the simulation model suggest what could happen. And then they just take the average, which is the white line, and show this as the weather forecast. But of course, 3 days out, if you look at the bar there on Thursday, there's already like a 4-degree corridor. And it's getting larger and larger, and basically they have no idea on how it's the weather going to be, but they still make it look like they would tell you what the weather will be like in 2 weeks. The long-term future is totally unpredictable. We don't, even if we have good models, usually we don't even know the past and present reliably. My best thing when I heard that, I couldn't believe it, the United Nations does calculations of the world population since about 1950 on the same model. So the world population from the year 1950 has been revised 43 times since 1950. So they make constant revisions to the number. We have no idea how many people are on this planet. We just can't know. And if you followed German politics, they had the German micro-census, and they have the same problem, that in Germany they can't even go down to a city level and have no idea how many people are actually living in a city. There are just too many factors you can't know about. I'm not a big fan of military operations, but Donald Rumsfeld once called them the unknown unknowns. So there's a couple of things you know that you don't know, but worse are the things that you don't know that you don't know. So the really big things lurking out there. You have feedback loops, you saw that with the pendulum and chaos theory, and finally you have singularities that throw everything overboard. My favorite singularity in German history is November 9th. November 9th, for example, in 1918, start of the November Revolution that ended German monarchy inside the First World War. 1923 on November 9th, interesting factoid, Adolf Hitler was nearly killed in Munich when police tried to arrest him, and because the policeman shot a little bit to the left, he was still alive. 1938, November 9th, of course, Reichspogromnacht, the start of the systematic decimation of Jew business and Jews in Germany. And in 1989, the speaker for the East German government made a mistake in a press conference and basically told the journalists that the East German border would be open right now. They had a very different plan in place, but basically that we start a German reunification November 9th with the opening of the Berlin Wall happened because of a simple mistake in a press conference on that specific day. And if you're asking me, what's the 1942 doing there? That's the birthday of my father. But it looks like a great pattern. I mean, so many things that define German history over the last century have happened on November 9th, but it's just a coincidence. There's nothing magic about this date. It's just a gigantic jackpot. If I would have bet that something happens on November 9th, I would have won big because nobody would have believed me. But again, that's how it works. So we simply, in our brain, have no idea on how to get statistical facts into order. And that makes us, with a lot of effects, very susceptible in predicting the future. And so I brought two personal examples, because it's very easy to joke about other people, how they went wrong. I'm giving you two examples, a normal one and a more personal one you're going to see about. So, for example, I was one of the folks who, when Nintendo announced Wii, said, that's great, because it will fail miserably. The core target audience, basically all those teenage boys playing shooting games, they're not going to like it. It is too far away from the standard concept. They'll never reach critical mass. They'll be out of stores after 9 months and so forth. Of course, those predictions were totally wrong. There's a couple of things. First of all, wrong extrapolation from the core market, so looking only at a certain set of data and not at the other set of data, that there might be another different market for it. Social confirmation, meaning that all the experts, gaming magazines and industry experts who were around did not like it, so we all were thinking the same, groupthink, discarding information not fitting this model. And what's interesting is that we did something, they tapped into a totally different psychological effect, this illusion of control thing. Who has played Wii bowling? Do you think that you really were good or bad in the game? Or because you aren't. The precision isn't there to really control this. But the thing about good game design, that's something that I learned from Howard Lincoln when he was working back at Microsoft, when they looked at what people thought was fun in a game was, the more people thought they were in control of the game and were in control of winning the game, the more they liked it, even if the game helped them and did things for them. It's, for example, one of the things in racing games that most people find racing simulations that are really, really hardcore simulations not very fun to play because they're very unforgiving. But if you build a racing simulation that has a lot of driving aids and really isn't about physics but more about fun, take something like Mario Kart, that's something everybody enjoys and plays. And we does this illusion of control thing really, really good. You think, you bold, but in reality they just made an estimation. They make you win some of the times because they couldn't get a correct reading and all that stuff, and it's great about that. It's not like putting an error message up there, could you redo that, I didn't get it right, but more like, okay, we'll just give him that, it's fine. And because of that, it's so much fun. And that was ignored by all the people in the industry saying, this is so much fun, and fun might sell. People thought, no, you need more polygons to sell. So good that they proved them wrong. So the next example, and I'm very sorry to say that, statistically will apply to many people in this room, most likely in the future. But none of us believes it's going to happen. Maybe a couple of people, and you'll immediately know why when I show this up. So I thought, when I married this woman, that would be living happily ever after. And that is a prediction of the future that for about 40% of couples in Germany statistically will be totally wrong. And the first thing you do is what's called the so-called base rate neglect, meaning that a lot of business decisions, and this is not a business decision, but it works the same way, is done with ignoring standard things. You know that about 2 out of 3 restaurants will close 2 years after they've opened because they simply don't work out. So there is a 65% failure rate for your restaurant right from the start. Still, people start restaurants because you just filter that out, because you can have confirmation bias. At its very worst, you think about all the good things that can happen. And of course, being in love with somebody opens up an idea of very much good things that can happen. And there's this optimism bias. You never think about what will happen if it doesn't work out. You never make any plans for that or so. And finally, in my case, getting real personal here, it's something which is called, and you have that in business too, you have something which is called the sunk cost fallacy. So you're ending up at a point where, say, we have a house, we have kids, I can't end this now, even although we're all unhappy. But the thing is that you have to look into the future and not into the past if you do that. And I'm happy to say that the 4 of us, my 2 kids, my ex-wife and me, we're all very happy now, and we're actually agree on a lot of things again together. We're eating together every 2 weeks and having fun and so forth. So that's fine. So we got it worked out, but still we had to get to a point where we did understand it doesn't work out. And it's the same with business decisions. You have a company, they're not doing really well on something, or a project of yours doesn't work as well as intended. And you really have to see the point where you say, look, just doing more of this won't help it. The probability of it ending bad is too high instead of just doing it because there's already so much work into it. I did spend 9 months on this program. I need to finish it because it would be 9 months lost. No, every next day you work on it is an additional day that you lose, that you have spent on something else, because everything that has happened in the past is done, is gone. No regrets. That actually is, if I look at my philosophy, how do I deal with predictions, it's no regrets. Took me a while to learn that. I learned that about 7 years ago, so I needed to get 40. No regrets, also no greed, lots of fun. So basically, I now accept that I and others don't have a power of foresight. We simply don't know. Nobody knows, and that's fine, because it opens up a lot of possibilities for us in looking into things and future paths. Whenever somebody gives me good advice or wants me to do something, especially salespersons, but whatever, if I look into reports from experts coming in on business decisions I have to do in my day job, I always ask myself what's in it for them, because most of the time it's not somebody giving you a good prediction, it's just a sales pitch. or something else. They want to do something. Friends, that's what differentiates friends from other people. Friends know you, and they'll make a recommendation for you because they know you. My favorite example is I hate fantasy, period. Science fiction, great. Fantasy, anything with magicians and dragons, usually I can't stand. Several people told me, you need to watch Game of Thrones. Why? Because you told us you liked Dallas. If anybody remembers Dallas. It's more like it's this complicated soap opera and thing, and the fantasy is just the setting. And they were right. I love Game of Thrones, but I would have never looked at it on my own because I would have put it in another, well, Swords and Wizards thing back. The other thing, and that is very difficult to achieve, and that is now the part that my boss at Microsoft definitely doesn't want to hear, is if somebody asks me for a forecast, how many X of Y will we sell next year, I can be absolutely convincing. So I can build great Excel and PowerPoint decks and tell them, this is going to be the sales curve, and at this point in time or so. Two things. A, I'm a convincing seller because I know they want it for whatever reason, but I also know it's probably not going to be right, so I'm not putting that much work into it. I'm putting more work into the believable story than the actual numbers. They don't like this when I say it, but they eat it all the time. I'm getting away with this all the time. I know people that are going very deep and tuning numbers in there. I'm just trying to get something that looks plausible, has some nice Excel formulas, off it goes. I have endurance coverage only for probable and really bad things. So probability that I might get a fatal but sort of curable disease that's very expensive to cure is pretty high, so I have basic healthcare stuff. But all those extra endurances that I can get a nicer room or whatever, I don't take. And there's a lot of things you don't need, like a glass endurance. That's what my wife wanted, was a glass endurance. And it was very expensive, and we never used it because, funnily enough, once you have endurance, usually nothing breaks. And I stripped it down to, in Germany, you need like 2 or 3 things, and you're done. And that's what I suggest, because endurance, again, is a gamble, a prediction on the future that somebody at an insurance company makes to maximize their profits. So they want to make money out of it. So no regrets when I made a bad decision or when I called the future incorrectly. So I did, fine. I'll have another try. No greed. That's the lottery thing. Something sounds too good to be true. Something really needs to be like changing a job just because I'm dissatisfied with this one and the other job looks really, really nice. That's sort of a kind of greed that I think, because you think that the gain that is unproven, whether you get it, is so much more than the pain you currently have. It usually is a wrong decision. So you need to go inside yourself and really think about it, whether you're too greedy about things. And of course, having lots of fun. So it's fine to buy lottery tickets. It's fine to go into the casino if you just say, I'm paying a fee to have some fun. Just don't go there to get rich. Predictions are about convincing people today, not about being right tomorrow, and that's the very same thing for yourself. So any predictions you make, any plans you make, they're for making a decision right now. But none of us are looking at this way of, did I do this right, and what can I learn from this? And that's very important when you look at the future. And the other thing is, others want to see your plans to success. So you're starting a new business, you want a loan from the bank, they want to know how you are going to succeed. But what you really need for yourself is, you need some kind of plan for what's going to happen if it fails. And the number one thing you need is, and once I applied that to all kinds of things in my life, I feel a lot happier. You just need to write down, I'll stop doing this when this happens. When my bank account goes below a certain threshold, I'll start doing extra work, whatsoever. You need to set down some rules, and you need to stick to them. The worst thing that you can have is thinking of your future tomorrow doing those things you can't do today, because predicting that your future tomorrow will be a different person, will be more effective, and will do all the things you couldn't do today is very wrong. So for some situations you go into, if you're trying a new project or so, you just need to define the exit criteria for yourself. When do you stop and do something else? And what happens when you do something else? And then take your chances, and then try to be as creative as you can, try to get new stuff going, because if everybody just does the same stuff over and over again, it will be very boring. And I've seen a lot of creative things, and I want to see more creative things in the future, but I also want you all to survive, have food and rent and all the other things happening there. So, and of course, don't listen to me. Because as I told you, experts usually are wrong, and they're giving you a very simplistic worldview, which I just did, and I also told you that this usually is wrong. So none of this might apply to you, because all of this, again, is defined by your style of work. But the one thing that you should take away here is, don't eagerly listen to experts and take their opinions for granted. And that is something that is becoming more and more important every day, because the internet is full of them. So as now anybody can publish, statistically, you're going to find some people that will be right about 2 or 3 or 4 things they're going to predict. And because when many people write down things, and you're getting the Genie Dixon effect, and people will start to believe that this person might have a clue how financial markets work. I can tell you, they can't, they won't. There's enough statistics in the world that show you that no financial advisor in the world has any better chance than throwing dice of making money. In the long run, short run, 2 or 3 years, they might be really good, but somehow they will fail. And the thing is, we listen to the people that are experts because they have this track record of being right. And again, if you put many people onto something, some of them will eventually be right just by pure chance. So don't listen too much to experts, but read some books. So here's my reading list for your Christmas vacation. Some of the stuff I've talked about will be in here. Paul Milo, Your Flying Car Awaits, which is a great history of all the kinds of technological and social. Oh, you don't need to photograph this. I can send you the list. It will be much more easier to read. It's great about all the technological marvels that we didn't get, and also all the predictions about socioeconomics and so forth that didn't work out. It's more of sort of a funny look at how things didn't happen, but it doesn't go deeper into why those things did not happen. Well, with flying cars, once you think about it, is how are we going to regulate airspace, and how are we going to build traffic lights up in the air? So once you realize 1 million flying cars in the air, you see it must be a pretty bad idea, which leads me to the book below, Everything is Obvious Once You Know the Answer. A great book by Duncan Watts. He worked for a while at Yahoo as a psychologist, sociologist, researcher. He has some pretty great stories about this, that in hindsight, everything just looks right, and we get the story on how it should have been, but of course nobody can see it before. There's the optimism bias from Tali Charot, which is talking about our way of how we can, the lottery example of how we can envision on what we do with 2 million euros, but not with 2 euros less, and all the other things around this. Dan Gardner, whom I mentioned, Future Babel, he goes from the economy side mainly, and dismantling all those things about financial markets, on how people think that economy works, and that in the end it actually becomes both a game of psychology and what it's called a Ponzi scheme, Kettenbrief. We can talk about that. We have about an hour after my talk, so you can squeeze me on that. There's Philip Tedlock, Expert Political Judgment, if you're into statistics. He's great on statistics. The Art of Thinking Clearly, if you don't have a lot of time, Rolf Dobelli, also available in German. In German it's 2 books, in English it's 1. great idea. These are basically 2 or 3 pages essays on all the things that are wrong in our brain. So you can get 2-page reads about optimism bias, sunk cost fallacy, and so forth. So it's very good if you just want a quick read on some of those things. If you really want to see how the brain works, I can't recommend this enough. Thinking Fast and Slow from Daniel Kahneman it's thick. It sometimes is repetitious. In the end, it becomes slightly complicated, but it's very well researched. He has a Nobel Prize in economics, although he should have one if there would be one in psychology, because he's really taking apart the way how we think, how our instincts, our pattern recognition system works, immediately assigns values to decisions, and how these usually are totally wrong if you would look at them at a rational way, and again gives you a lot of ideas on how you can avoid all those thinking mistakes. So if you have lots of time, read that one. It contains a lot of the things that are in the other books, but each of them is interesting, funny to read, and a recommendation of mine. So, thank you very much for taking your time. I hope you at least agree that this was different to all the other things you heard today. And you can quiz me on everything outside. And again, if you want to write me a mail, oh, there's no mail on this one. If you want to write me a mail about this or follow me on Twitter, here you are. And again, just send me a mail and I'll give you the full set of slides plus my reading list if you want to. Thank you.